Okay, everyone, thank you for one moment while I pull up. Okay, we should be live now. All right. Greetings to all. And good afternoon, everyone. We're thrilled to have you join us today for this special event, Remembering Rachel Corrie 20 years later. My name is Muhammad, and I'm the Program and Communications Manager here at the Jerusalem Fund. And before we begin, I'd like to thank all of our distinguished guests and panelists for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping points to cover. Please note that this event is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube and Facebook. It will also be available on our website. Additionally, we are using the Zoom webinar feature for the first time. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen, and we will be sure to address them after the speakers have finished. We will also be keeping an eye on any questions submitted by those watching on Facebook or on YouTube. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's event, the Jerusalem Fund's very own Executive Director, Jihad Abu Salim. Jihad, please take it away. I guess one.
Thank you so much, Muhammad, and welcome everyone. I will start in a couple of seconds. We'll also give our guests the chance to join us. So I'll be with you shortly.
Yeah, for those just tuning in right now or joining, Jihad will be introducing our speakers for today before opening the floor to them to present on their work over the last 20 years, touch on some of Rachel's life and her legacy and what that's meant over the years. Before then we'll address a Q&A, any questions anyone would have asked during the discussion session after, moderated by Jihad.
Okay, thank you so much, Muhammad. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this virtual event. My name is Jihad Abu Salim, and I am honored to serve as the new Executive Director of the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center in Washington, D.C. Today's event is particularly special to me as we commemorate the life and memory of Rachel Corrie with her wonderful parents, Cindy and Craig, whom I will introduce shortly. I was a 15-year-old living in Gaza when I first heard about Rachel's tragic death. At the height of the Second Intifada and on the brink of the invasion of Iraq, it was a time of bloodshed, fear, and uncertainty. We felt abandoned by the world, and then we learned of Rachel. Amidst an extreme sense of isolation, Rachel's sacrifice and martyrdom reminded us that we were not alone, that there were people across the globe who cared and were willing to put their lives on the line to defend people's dignity, freedom, and fight for justice everywhere. But Rachel did not have to pay with her life for this to be known. She had a long life ahead of her, and it was Israel's criminal war machine that ended a bright young woman's journey on this earth. Still, Rachel's memory continues to inspire countless individuals and activists and organizers in the struggle for justice and freedom in Palestine and beyond. It has been 20 years since her murder, and although her killers have not been brought to justice yet, Rachel's legacy lives on. And indeed, Rachel's courage is more powerful than Israel's bulldozers. I'm truly honored to welcome Cindy and Craig Corrie, and I'm grateful for their participation in today's event. We will begin by introducing them and their work through the Rachel Corrie Foundation, followed by a 30 to 40-minute presentation from them. Afterward, we will open the floor for a Q&A session. As my colleague Muhammad mentioned, this event is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube and Facebook, and will also be available on our website. For this event, we are utilizing the Zoom webinar feature for the first time. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them following the speakers' presentations. We will also monitor questions submitted by those watching on Facebook or YouTube. Okay, Cindy and Craig Corrie. They are the parents of human rights activist and observer Rachel Corrie, who in 2003 was killed by an Israeli military-operated Caterpillar D9R bulldozer in the Gaza Strip, as she tried to prevent the demolition of a Palestinian family's home. Rachel wrote of the importance of making commitments to people and places. Since her death, her family and community have strived to continue the commitment to Palestine that Rachel intended. For over a decade, the Corries pursued accountability in Rachel's case through efforts in the US Congress, at the Departments of State and Justice, and in US and Israeli courts. From 2003 through 2016, the Corries traveled often to the Middle East, supporting multiple delegations to the region and making 5 trips to Gaza. During the past 20 years, they have spoken broadly throughout the US and world, sharing their daughter's story, educating and advocating for Palestine and universal human rights, and standing with Palestinians in their quest for freedom, equality, and peace with justice. The Corries, who I had the honor of working with them and meeting them before, are volunteers for the Rachel Corrie Foundation for Peace and Justice, a 501c3 nonprofit they co-founded nearly 20 years ago in their hometown, Olympia, Washington. The foundation educates about Palestine and related issues and fosters grassroots advocacy that informs US policy and the pursuit of human rights and social justice. The foundation promotes connections between peoples and maintains support for grassroots-initiated sport and arts activities for youth in Gaza and a women's scholarship program at Birzeit University in the West Bank. The Rachel Corrie Foundation has been recognized for outstanding service for human rights by the Thurston County Diversity Council. Cindy and Craig Corrie have received a Human Rights Advocates of the Year Award from Seattle University's Human Rights Network and a Pillar of Peace Award from the Pacific Northwest region of the American Friends Service Committee. In October 2012, the Corries traveled to Reykjavik, Iceland, to accept the Lennon Ono Grant for Peace on behalf of their daughter, Rachel. Now, please join me in welcoming Cindy and Craig Corrie as we honor Rachel's life and an unwavering commitment to justice. Cindy and Craig, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Jihad, for that very warm introduction. It's wonderful to be with you and with Mohammed, and we are so grateful to all of you at the Jerusalem Fund for remembering Rachel on this 20th anniversary and for giving us the opportunity to meet with you. Craig and I, through the years, have given hundreds of talks, and we try to introduce Rachel to our audiences, and we were asked by the Jerusalem Fund to do that today. I know that some of you know the story well, but we also know that there are new generations of people that aren't aware of the story. So I'm glad for the opportunity this morning to tell you a bit about my daughter. Rachel was a writer and an artist. She wrote, "Writing is brave. It is maybe the only brave thing about me." As a young girl, she wrote, "My name is Rachel Corrie. I was born on April 10th, 1979 in Olympia, Washington, to my mother and father, Craig and Cindy Corrie, a brother, Chris, who was about 7, a sister, Sarah, who was 2 years younger, and a really old cat named Phoebe. We have the gift of Rachel's writing in Let Me Stand Alone, the Journals of Rachel Corrie, which was published by W.W. Norton in 2008. Rachel's story has also unfolded on stages throughout the world as well in the play, My Name is Rachel Corrie. The play was edited from her writing by actor Alan Rickman and Guardian editor Catherine Viner. And we've seen the play performed in Arabic, in Haifa, in Nazareth, and in Jaffa, and in Hebrew in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And we were able to watch and hear it in French, in Brussels, in Icelandic, in Reykjavik, in Iceland, in Turkish, in Istanbul, and in English throughout the English-speaking world. Rachel was a reader and a thinker, and she was given to making lists. She wrote 5 people I wish I'd met who are dead: Salvador Dali, Carl Jung, MLK, JFK, Josephine. 5 people to hang out with in eternity: Rainier M. Rilke, Jesus, E.E. Cummings, Gertrude Stein, Zelda Fitzgerald. 6, Charlie Chaplin. Rachel wrote, I was born under the ram. I'm an Aries, a fire sign. I was born with a fire in my belly. Rachel went to Olympia schools, and she attended and graduated from the Evergreen State College here in Olympia. In June 2003, her diploma was presented posthumously to her father and to me. From high school on, she volunteered with the Olympia Crisis Clinic. And during her college years, she worked for behavioral health resources and created a drop-ins program for those with mental illness who struggled to venture into our community. Rachel loved the Pacific Northwest woods, the Cascade and Olympic Mountains, and the nearby sea. As a college student, she wrote about where we live here in Puget Sound, and she said, Perry Creek winds its way out of forest roads and lookouts near Rock Candy. In the winter, the salmon come back, purpling, and fight upstream. In the summer, the rushes grow so tall you can hide in them and be completely invisible. Rachel talked about wanting to stay in those rushes forever. So what took her to Gaza? In 2001, 9/11 was a turning point for Rachel. She worked to understand why it had happened. As the US turned to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, Rachel turned to her community. In 2002, she organized and worked with others to create a flock of doves for the Olympia Procession of the Species. This is a community event that honors all of life. She wrote, I've danced down the street with 40 people from the ages of 7 to 70 dressed as doves. In a lot of ways, I think the procession is a values statement. I'm happy to see a peace message included in that. I think it's important for people who oppose war and repression to speak about who we are as a community, in addition to speaking about war and racism and injustice. We are not outside. I think it's important that human rights and resistance to oppression be included in the way we define ourselves as a community. Rachel became active in local peace groups and with local activists who in 2002 had traveled to Palestine to stand nonviolently in solidarity with Palestinians. She began studying Arabic and developed her plan to travel to Palestine herself. She wrote, why do I want to go? I've been organizing in Olympia for a little over a year on anti-war global justice issues. And at some point, it started to feel like this work is missing a solid connection to the people who are most immediately impacted by US foreign policy. I've had this underlying need to go to a place and meet people who are on the other end of the portion of my tax money that goes to fund the US and other militaries. In January 2003, over 20 years ago, Rachel waved goodbye to her sister in the driveway of our family home here in Olympia, where the two of them had grown up together. She waved goodbye to Perry Creek, which runs into Eld Inlet and Puget Sound, and where she learned that the Squeattle tribe had lived before. Rachel flew to Tel Aviv in Israel and made her way to Beit Sahur in the West Bank for training with the International Solidarity Movement, or ISM. ISM is a Palestinian-led movement founded in 2001 and committed to using nonviolent methods and principles to resist the Israeli occupation. There are only two stipulations for joining with ISM. One must believe in freedom and equality for the Palestinian people, and one must commit to using only nonviolent strategies and actions. Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who was president of the Union of Palestinian Medical Relief Committees at the time, wrote, "These people came, even at risk of injury, arrest, and deportation, to stand side by side with Palestinians against the Israeli military occupation. Whether they came to break the siege, protect children going to school, or to pick olives, they have come." From her ISM training, Rachel went to Rafah in Gaza, where she felt the need was greatest. When Rachel was in Gaza in 2003, it was occupied from within. 25,000 Israeli soldiers supported the presence of 8,000 settlers in 21 Gaza settlements, taking approximately 40% of Gaza's land from the 1.8 million Palestinians who were living there at the time. There were internal checkpoints manned by soldiers, IDF sniper towers lining the perimeter, and ongoing Israeli military incursions into neighborhoods. Regularly, civilians, including many children, were killed and injured, and immense amounts of property were being destroyed. Rachel wrote to us, and she said, "I couldn't even believe that a place like this existed. But even more, can you believe there are children here? Forget the fear. They tell me that at night. Forget the fear. I am ashamed that I am scared for my own body and dying anonymously inside a house in one of the most populous places on earth, where children die as martyrs of the occupation, which we pay for quietly without ever knowing their names. We need more people. I love all of you, Rachel." With other ISM activists, Palestinians, and internationals from Sweden, Italy, Japan, and the UK, Rachel lived and worked in solidarity with families in Gaza. The activists slept at water wells to try to protect them from demolition. Rachel worked with children's and women's groups and human rights organizations in Gaza, and planned for building connections with an Olympia Rafah Sister City project. At a small internet cafe in Rafah, she spent hours writing to get the stories from Gaza out to our family, to her friends, and to the international media. She wrote about the children. "I don't know if many of the children here have ever existed without tank shell holes in their walls and the towers of an occupying army surveying them constantly from the near horizons. I think, although I'm not entirely sure, that even the smallest of these children understand that life is not like this everywhere. An 8-year-old was shot and killed by an Israeli tank 2 days before I got here, and many of the children murmur his name to me, Ali, or point at the posters of him on the walls." Rachel and other ISM activists built relationships with Palestinian families along the Gaza-Egypt border and engaged in nonviolent direct action to support families whose homes were threatened with demolition. One of these families was the Nasrallah family. It was in front of their home that Rachel was killed. Rachel wrote to me about her stay there. She said, "I went incommunicado from the affinity group for about 10 hours, which I spent with a family on the front line in Hai Salam, who fixed me dinner and have cable TV. The 2 front rooms of their house are unusable because gunshots have been fired through the walls. So the whole family, 3 kids and 2 parents, sleep in the parents' bedroom. I sleep on the floor next to the youngest daughter, Iman, and we all share blankets." The Nasrallah family included 2 brothers, their wives, and 5 young children who lived in a 2-story home near the Egyptian border. In 2005, after Rachel was killed, part of the family visited the US to speak and travel with Craig and me. To do so, they had to have Israeli and US permission to travel to Tel Aviv for their visas. Neither the US nor the Israeli government had any concern about this family, yet their home near the Egyptian border was made unlivable by the Israeli military in 2003 and was completely destroyed in 2004 without compensation. There were massive clearing demolitions during the period when Rachel was in Rafah. The Israeli military demolished homes and raised land in Rafah to widen a narrow Israeli-controlled corridor between Egypt and Gaza, the Philadelphia corridor. An Israeli colonel, Yom Tov Samya, said on Israeli military radio during that period that each time Arafat did something, the Israeli military needed to take down another row of houses. In our court trial in Israel, when asked how far the Philadelphia corridor extended, an officer in the Israeli military testified up to the next row of houses. Between September 2000 and September 2004, more than 10% of Rafah's population, over 16,000 people, lost their homes to demolitions as the Israeli military cleared a wide buffer strip and constructed a large steel wall along Rafah's border with Egypt. In their report, Raising Rafah, Mass Home Demolitions in the Gaza Strip, Human Rights Watch reported that the pattern of destruction strongly suggested that Israeli forces demolished homes wholesale, regardless of whether they posed a specific threat, in violation of international law. In most cases, Human Rights Watch found the destruction was carried out in the absence of military necessity. On Sunday, March 16, 2003, Rachel and 7 other international activists from the US and UK worked the full afternoon, challenging 2 Israeli military Caterpillar D9R bulldozers and an armored personnel carrier that had appeared and were operating in the High Salam area of Rafah, clearing land, pushing against structures, and threatening homes. There were 2 Israeli soldiers in each bulldozer, the driver and a commander who was elevated in the bulldozer and was to be a second set of eyes. We learned later that the company commander and the armored personnel carrier on the site requested that the operation cease because of the activists. But his commander in the rear ordered that the work continue and said the soldiers were not to let the activists interfere with their work. At about 5 p.m., one of the bulldozers made a run toward the Nasrallah home. Rachel took a position between the bulldozer and the home. And as the bulldozer approached, she climbed the pile of dirt being pushed. Earlier in the afternoon, the bulldozers stopped when they came to the activists' feet or pushed them into concertina wire along the structures. But this time, the driver continued forward and over Rachel until she was under the bulldozer. Then it paused and backed over her again. Rachel's friends rushed to her as she lay in the path left by the bulldozer. Her last words were, "I think my back is broken." Members of the Nasrallah family watched through a crack in their garden wall as the bulldozer had approached. The world responded to Rachel in many ways. In Rafah, they said she was the woman who came to stop the tanks. In Athens, Greece, they referred to her as she who would not retreat. In Olympia, they called her peacemaker. A woman in New York wrote to us and said, "My grandparents fled the pogroms of Russia 100 years ago and spent decades working for the creation of a Jewish homeland. I'm certain that if they were alive, they would weep for all that is happening there now, as I do." And a professor in Egypt wrote to Rachel after she was killed and said, "Wherever she may be, you know that for me, America is connected with Israeli massacres of my people. You know how difficult it is for me to be objective, how difficult it was to admit that thanks to you, I have come to know that there is a conscience in America. I say that thanks to you, there is a conscience on that other side, young and not just alert, but alerting in its capacity for sacrifice, prepared to die for another people in a simple jacket and a pair of blue jeans. Rachel wrote to us and said, I think freedom for Palestine could be an incredible source of hope to people struggling all over the world. She taught us that we can all make a difference. She left us with a great deal of work to do. Craig will now share some of our family's experience seeking accountability for Rachel's killing as we worked with the US and Israeli governments and in Israeli courts. Thank you.
I think first of all, we need to do a little work here with our computer. So hopefully you can hear me now without an echo. Good, I see nods. So I am trying to get my PowerPoint caught up with me. So hi, I'm Craig Corrie, Rachel's father, and I want to talk a little bit about Cindy and my and our family's search for accountability after Rachel was killed. So we look for accountability through Israeli military justice, through diplomacy, through the US investigation and civil lawsuits in the United States and Israeli civil courts. So let's talk first about Israeli military justice. Many of you may know about that. On March 17th, 2003, we heard that there was a promise from Prime Minister Sharon to President Bush, and President Bush was promised a thorough, credible, and transparent investigation into Rachel's case with a report to the United States. But on May 23rd, we were told that Israeli military police closed their investigation with no charges brought and concluding that the two soldiers in the D9R Caterpillar bulldozer did not see Rachel, although the international witnesses said she was clearly visible. The Israeli government declined to release its investigation to the US, and later on, staff at the US Embassy and Department of State and family members were permitted to read this report and take notes, but as of yet, the actual report has not been released publicly. On June 11, 2004, Lawrence B. Wilkerson, who was then Chief of Staff to Colin Powell at the Department of State, wrote to us and he said that, quote, without equivocation, he could say that the military police report did not reflect an investigation that was thorough, credible, and transparent. And it's remaining the position of the US government to this day that no thorough, credible, and transparent investigation has taken place. So you go to diplomacy, trying to work on that. And just a few highlights of what happened with that. In 2008, during a confirmation process in the Senate, Ambassador-designate to Israel, James Cunningham, responded to questions for the record from the then chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Joe Biden Jr., and regarding Rachel's case. He stated that the US had repeatedly engaged the government of Israel at the highest levels about this issue. He noted that the President Bush, Secretary Colin Powell, Ambassador Daniel Kurtzer, Deputy Chief of Mission Richard LeBaron, Assistant Secretary William Burns, Deputy Assistant Secretary David Satterfield, among others, had raised this issue with their counterparts and other appropriate authorities in the Israeli government. And he promised to do the same. But before that, on March 14th of 2008, Michelle Bernier-Toth, Managing Director of the Office of Overseas Citizen Services at DOS, wrote to us, and she said, quote, "We have consistently requested that the government of Israel conduct a full, transparent investigation of Rachel's death. our requests go unanswered or ignored. So with that not working, earlier, right after Rachel's death in April of 2003, her congressman, Brian Baird, introduced HCR 111 into the Congress. And it called for three things. It called for a condolences to Rachel's family. It called for the investigation to be made, and it encouraged the governments of the US and Israel to work together so that this does not happen again. On March 17, 2005, the family met with finally Barry Sabin in the Department of Justice, or the Justice Department. But on May 5th of 2006, the Department of Justice refused to open an investigation into Rachel's case. We don't know how high that decision came when we asked, but Barry Sabin was a presidential appointee in the Justice Department. So then, what was left to us? We filed lawsuits, and we had two of them. And I'll talk about the first one, the one against Caterpillar Inc., which was filed on March 15th of 2005. And the Corrie family and 4 Palestinian families were the plaintiffs on that. And what we were trying to do was hold Caterpillar accountable for continuing to sell and service their machinery to Israel while they were on notice that human rights violations were occurring. So it wasn't the case that somebody bought this machinery and then went out and used it for a purpose that Caterpillar would know about. It's that after they were doing that, Caterpillar continued to sell this, this equipment. But that case was subsequently dismissed by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals for lack of jurisdiction. And let me tell you what they said about that. It was dismissed on September 17th, 2007. The court found that it did not have jurisdiction to decide the case because Caterpillar's bulldozers were ultimately paid for with the money from the United States. Because of the US government's decision to grant military assistance to Israel, any decision regarding whether Caterpillar aided and abetted war crimes would impermissibly intrude upon the executive branch foreign policy decisions. The court did not rule on the question of whether Caterpillar aided and abetted Israel war crimes. They simply said that if Caterpillar was on notice, so was the State Department. So then the last resource as a family that we could control to try and find some sort of accountability would be a civil lawsuit. And we did so filing in Israel on March 15th of 2003. The first day of the trial was March 10th, 2010. The last day of the trial was July 10th, 2011. 15 days of testimony, 23 witnesses. We are attempting to hold Caterpillar accountable for continuing to provide.
Not Caterpillar.
Excuse me, I'm on my wrong page.
Yeah.
Cindy's pointing this out. So I'm going to go on to a slide. This is our daughter Sarah standing next to Cindy and our two attorneys. So Abu Hussein is on the right in this picture, and he's the lead attorney. Jamil Dakwar was helping him out on this, and both have become great friends with us, and we really am glad they had it. I'll go on to another slide, try to get through this. But we charged the state of Israel violated Rachel's right to life and dignity, which are anchored in international humanitarian and human rights law, as well as in Israel's basic law. And we said that the killing was either intentional or gross negligence. So it took us 5 years, as I said, to get to court. And what I want to point out is that Israeli courts have little resistance to proceedings of this kind in the US. Oral testimony in our case took place in Haifa District Court, but it's heard by a single judge. There is no jury. And that's one of the reasons why the court dates were so spread out. It meets the judges calendar and not particularly one of a jury or the plaintiffs, even if they come from overseas. Because of an unusual security certificate signed by Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak, the key witnesses from the Israeli soldiers were hidden behind a screen, and they were visible only to the judge and the attorneys, but not to our family or others in the court. And I think we found this to be dehumanizing. I think it would have perhaps helped us have some more capacity for understanding the soldiers involved if we could have actually seen their faces. We heard from witnesses on the ground when Rachel was killed and from those in command. So a list sort of those, we had 4 international eyewitnesses, so friends of Rachel's. We had an autopsy physician. There was a 3-member investigating team that was on the stand, bulldozer driver and his commander. There were 2 in that bulldozer that day. And the personnel in a second bulldozer and personnel in an armored APC, armored personnel carrier, that was at the site as well. We heard from the company commander, a deputy battalion commander in charge, the colonel in the engineering corps who wrote operation manuals for military bulldozers. And then we heard from Pinky Suarez, who is the commanding officer of the Gaza Division Southern Brigade in 2003. For most of the military witnesses, we did not learn their names. They were only identified by initials or first names. And I would say that all the proceedings were attended by representatives of the U.S. Embassy. Most of the time, the U.S. Consul General was there with us. They, of course, the proceedings were in Hebrew. We had the help of actually Israeli Jews, most of whom were refuseniks that refused to serve with the IDF, were translating for us in there. But the findings were eventually that it was an act of war. Rachel was held responsible for her own killing, and they said that that it was a closed military zone and that she could not be seen. So we spent almost 8 months in Israel during the trial period and made a minimum of 5 trips to Haifa for the proceeding. And actually, we did learn a number of things through this court. One of the key things was the act of war was seen as relieving Israel of all responsibility. And the judge accepted basically every word that the military said. It's our belief that the Israeli state assumed that they could go into court and essentially charge Rachel with her own killing and put the international solidarity movement on trial and not the Israeli military. We did learn, however, that there was a shoot to kill order, and that was entered into the operations log shortly after Rachel was killed on March 16th. And it says at 1820 that it went in there, and it says, quote, "The foreigner problem is known in this region, and by way of policy, we do not stop activity due to the presence of foreigners in the area. In order not to form a dangerous precedent, those foreigners should be handled and their interests into the Gaza Strip should be forbidden. Additionally, the work must continue in the area in question. The firing orders must state that every adult person should be shot to kill." And that was written by Deputy Battalion Commander in charge that day. We also heard from witnesses, the Israeli witnesses, that they said repeatedly, there are no civilians in war. One, and actually more than one witness, stated that they were at war with everyone in Gaza. We were struck by the lead investigator from the military police, did do an investigation, but we consider that a whitewash. And I would point out that most Palestinians would not even have a military police investigation. But that his failure, as we could look over that investigation, he failed to resolve conflicting evidence and to turn evidence over to the court And we were alarmed at how the investigating team were aimed at exonerating the military rather than determining impartially what happened on March 16, 2003. And that's not what I would expect in a U.S. court, but I know that there are other minorities in the United States that might have expected that in a U.S. court. It was difficult for us when we heard particularly the bulldozer driver say that he could not remember the time of day that he killed Rachel. It seems like that would have been more important. There were comments from the court. Former President Jimmy Carter said, the killing of an American peace activist is unacceptable. The court's decision confirms a climate of impunity, which facilitates Israeli human rights violations against Palestinian civilians in the occupied territory. And Richard Falk, the special rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories from the UN, said, quote, "This is a sad outcome." He went on to say, "for the rule of law and the hope that an Israeli court would place limits on the violence of the state, particularly in relation to innocents and unarmed civilians in the occupied territory." We did appeal to the Israeli Supreme Court, and the decision was finally handed down on February 15th that affirmed the district court's opinion that and it also went on to say Israeli law supersedes international law. So with that, the Supreme Court, High Court of Israel, repudiated international law. So I'll leave it at that. And maybe I'll tell you one more story, because Rachel is often out in the world accused of protecting terrorists. And this is the family that came to the United States, the younger brother, his wife, and a baby that wasn't born in the United States. And I think Cindy related that they had to be able to go to Tel Aviv to come here, and they came here. Neither Israel nor United States had any problem with this family. They were allowed to freely go to Tel Aviv and to come to the United States. They were not considered terrorists. They're just a family. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig. And Cindy, thank you so much for sharing with us, and for, I can't imagine how difficult it must be for both of you to relive the trauma and the pain associated with your loss and with our loss as human beings and as Palestinians. And as I mentioned again, I was a 15-year-old going to school, living in the city of Deir al-Balah in the middle of the Gaza Strip. And I lived in a neighborhood that dealt with the same problems that the people Rachel protected in Rafah did. The settlement of Kfar Darom was close to my family's home, and the years of the Second Intifada for me were defined by the sounds and the roaring of those bulldozers, and I can't imagine the amount of pain that this caused Rachel and what her colleagues felt at that moment. So my deepest condolences to you, and all power to you both for your courage and for your patience and for your strength and for all the great work that you have dedicated yourselves to do throughout the years. I have some thoughts to share with you, but I would love to give the questions from our audience the priority in this conversation. And I have some questions listed, and I'm going to just read them one by one. But before I read the questions, it does seem that some of your friends and people who you know are in the audience. There is Emily Siegel and Kathy Christensen, who all send you, and many others who send you their warmest regards. And I'm grateful for their attendance as well, and I'm grateful for everybody's participation in today's event. So I'll start with a question from Ellen, and it's about the Nasrallah family. And we saw the photo that they have arrived in the US. I'm not sure if they were visiting or relocating, but Ellen is asking if you're in touch with them and how are they doing?
Yes, we are in touch with the Nasrallah family. We're fortunate during earlier years to be able to visit Gaza 5 times. So our first visit was in September of 2003 when they were still in their house at that point. And when Craig and I arrived there, it was the only house that was remaining in that entire area. Otherwise, it was what I called a sea of rubble from the demolition. And they couldn't leave at that time. If the house was left empty for even a short amount of time, then houses were demolished. So somebody had to be in the house at all times. And the children were young then. Khalid Nasrallah had 2 preschool-aged children, and Abu Karim, who lived on the lower story of the house, had 3. And Karim, their son, and Iman took me into the room that Rachel described, where they couldn't sleep in there. They couldn't stay in that room because at nighttime, military vehicles would come by and would shoot into the walls of the houses. And Khalid actually told us later that he would go out and he would put spackle or something over the bullet holes, hoping that it wouldn't look attractive as a place to shoot. But the children on that visit that Craig and I made took us into the room and they pulled off their Arab English dictionary and they said, Rachel worked on her Arabic and we worked on our English and we helped each other. And then they had me try to read the words in Arabic and they laughed at my pronunciation and they said, Rachel was much better and she knew how to pronounce all the words. And I've just heard from Karim Nasrallah this week because he supports our work with the Rachel Corrie Ramadan football tournament, which is in Gaza during Ramadan. They couldn't do it during the COVID period, but they are doing it again this year. And Karim helps to coordinate that with others through the Women's Program Center, Rafah. So we are in touch with him. We have Zoom now. These days, we're able to have Zoom meetings with the family. And it's a very challenging time in Gaza. We all know that. But I think that from what we know, the families are doing as well as they can. So we're grateful for that. And we've watched them grow up. Iman is now delivering babies. She's doing that kind of work. And Karim changed his major, or he chose his major after Rachel was killed to be English, so that he could continue to do the kind of work connecting people. So these are just wonderful, wonderful stories for us.
That's so touching, Cindy. And I mentioned that to you when we met in person in 2019. And Ahmed Abu Rtema came to the US. Rachel was an inspiration. And, as I mentioned in my introduction, her story disrupted that sense of loneliness and isolation that we felt during the Second Intifada, and I'm sure even on this, aside from the great impact and the legacy that Rachel left behind, and we were celebrating today, I'm sure her memory is very special for the community that she was with. So it's really touching to hear that. We have a question from Barbara. And Barbara is asking, since the well-publicized killing of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, there has been more discussion of the killing of US citizens by Israel. What is being done to remind the government and the media that these killings go back a long time and to reopen Rachel's and other victims' cases?
Well, for our family, and that I think briefly showed a picture of our daughter, Sarah, at the trial. When we heard about Shireen particularly, it was devastating. And partially because we could see in the news that her family was going through exactly the sort of thing that our family went through. We could hear what they're saying, and it gave you a long list of how long we worked on this, what the government was doing but could not do. And so we actually, through Sarah, reached out and did try to get an article just about what happened to Rachel and tying it together with what happened to Shireen to try to remind the government of what's going on. Of course, we were working with people in the Senate and a little bit in Justice, a little bit in the White House, a little bit in the State Department. But the last person that we actually talked to in the State Department was then the Deputy Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who is now the Secretary of State. So we were hoping that at least in that one way, we could remind this person who personally helped us. But what he couldn't do was really engage his whole department. But I know he wanted to help us and try to, but as I told him in that last meeting, I'm glad that he was considered. I'm glad that he wanted to help, but without engaging the institution of the State Department, he really couldn't help us much. So I think when I read, I don't know more about it. We have met with Shireen's family. I don't know more about that than what you can read in the newspapers, and perhaps in DC you know more, but I think they have gone farther. They have tried to institute, I believe, the FBI into looking into this, but there has to be consequences. It's not enough to simply say, now we know what happened. There have to be consequences. And I believe we have the laws to actually make consequences if we want to. The Leahy Amendment, which says we can't send money to military aid when it's used in human rights violations. It's my understanding that most of the time we look at that and the US feels that it somehow has to prove that the act was intentional and then what unit did it. And that seems to me that's backwards. If we're writing a check, we can stop writing checks until the other country that's getting that check proves to us the act is, either was an accident or tells us who did it, and that we need to verify that actually what they promised they'll do to change their operations, which they made many promises in Rachel's case about what they would do with the bulldozers. And then when we're in court 7 to 8 years later, they're saying, well, they didn't ever get around to making those changes. That's unacceptable. And it should be unacceptable to our government.
I'd just like to add that I'm sitting here with a Shireen Abu Akleh button. I don't know if you can see it, but her niece, Lena, gave it to me when we had the pleasure of meeting with Lena and other family members. And I wear it just as a reminder. Seeking accountability for Rachel was something we pursued very actively through 2015. But it's really accountability for certainly American citizens who are harmed, like Shireen, like Omar Assad from Wisconsin, like Cassandra Oren, Cassandra is an activist from Wisconsin that we know personally. She was on our, she actually did work last year when we were marking the anniversary of Rachel's killing in Gaza. And she was just recently working in the South Hebron Hills and was attacked by a settler with I read, a skull fracture. I understand she's doing okay, but she was in hospital there. So of course, our government should be acting to support these Americans who are harmed. But I'm also reminded in reading through my notes that I believe 9 Palestinians were killed in Gaza on the day Rachel was killed. I know one of their names, but I don't know the rest. And I think one of the things that I've been pleased about these last 20 years is that I feel like we have helped, and our other activists that we're connected with have worked very hard to elevate Palestinian voices. We've been able to hear from people like you, Jihad, and that's wonderful. And we need much more of that. And there are so many strong voices, Palestinian voices. And we also, every time we talk about Rachel, Shireen, Omar, we also have to remember the hundreds and thousands of others, Palestinians, who have been killed during the past 20 years and long before.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Now, you talked a little bit about the government in answering this question, and you know, accountability vis-a-vis the U.S. government or through the U.S. government. But there is a question from Martha about the corporate aspect of this issue, meaning in this case Caterpillar, and the question links both, you know, the government's responsibility with the responsibility of Caterpillar as a manufacturer of these bulldozers. And I'm sure you addressed this in your presentation, but you know, just to provide like you know, a brief answer for this question, which is about whether you filed or you plan to file a suit against the US for being complicit in supplying the Caterpillar tractors. And I would add to this question whether you participated in campaigns that targeted Caterpillar as part of, you know, broader BDS effort.
Well, we didn't file something against the U.S. government because the courts at probably it seemed to me that, for instance, when we were in court at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the 3 judges there seemed pretty sympathetic to us, and particularly to our distinguished attorney. So, and their findings is basically that the court is separate from the executive branch, and so they're not going to opine on it. So if we're thrown out of court because they paid the bill, we're not going to get into court because more directly than that. And I think I at least thought it was would be an uphill battle to actually get Caterpillar held responsible for that. But I come from the corporate world. I worked for insurance companies, which is a lot different thing than building weapons. But it seemed to me that if I could imagine a boardroom, that if somebody walks into the boardroom and says, well, what are our bulldozers being used for? The answer might well be, well, I don't know, but they pay for them, so why do I care? But if the answer is, no, we get sued because they're being used for human rights violations, and a board sometimes, when they don't take remedial action, can be sued personally for not doing that, that could change the whole way the US and other countries proceed in the world. So it seems to me it was maybe a long shot, but it was a shot worth taking just for what it could do. So we have not pursued that. We certainly have worked. Cindy and I have been to a Caterpillar shareholders meeting. We were using the Sisters of Laredo, I think, own a few shares, but allows them to get into the meeting. And we were able then to talk to and give our message directly to the chairman of the board and other high-ranking officials at Caterpillar, plus the rest of their board, which is kind of a who's who of other people in the military industrial complex. So And we certainly do call for boycotting Caterpillar because they continue to do this. They could stop doing it anytime they wanted to. It's not mandatory. Nobody's making Caterpillar do that. It's all for profit, and it's shameful.
I would add that I forget the year, but with other activists, people came from throughout the Midwest to Peoria, where Caterpillar was based at the time. And Craig and I had written a letter to Caterpillar asking for a meeting with the director. And we got a message back that we had explained ourselves so well in the letter that they didn't need to meet with us. Then in Peoria, I think it was 500 or so people that came to that relatively small community, a couple hours from Chicago. And we marched down the street. It was pretty shocking when we got to the corporate offices, because there were police in riot gear on top of the building surrounding the area. And of course, this was a nonviolent protest. There was some theater done by some of the activists that performed in the square there. Craig and I walked up to the door and said, we'd like to go talk to the people inside. A very nice law enforcement person said he knew that we wanted to do that, but we weren't going to be allowed into the building. And so that was the course of that particular demonstration. We also, I can't remember the year, but Caterpillar was given an award by a group in Washington, D.C. And with the support of people from throughout the country, we challenged that. And in fact, Caterpillar did receive the award, but they canceled the event at which it was going to be given. So, so some attention was brought to their role. And, you know, we can all just continue to try to draw attention to how businesses and corporations, how we all participate in what's happening there.
Thank you for that. And we have 10 to 15 minutes left, so I want to make best use of the remaining time. There is a question, there are two actually similar questions from Anas Shalal and Donald Wagner. Anas asks, what's next? What can we do here in the United States at this time to continue the struggle for justice for Rachel? And Don Wagner asks, what do you think about the way forward for Palestinians and for you? Thank you for your honesty, dignity, and sumud, steadfastness.
Those are questions from good friends. So with Don in mind, of course, he reminds us that our resistance has to be a loving resistance. And I've come over the years to think that that is not necessarily, you know, loving your enemy isn't necessarily because your enemy deserves to be loved. It's something you do for yourself. You have to keep that love within yourself. So I think we can work on that. I would say, so if you talk about justice for Rachel, I'm pretty brutal about that. There's nothing we can do for Rachel. She was killed. That's over. What we have to work for, if we want justice for Rachel, what we have to work for is the justice Rachel was trying to find for the Palestinian people when she went there. And that, sadly, is still is a long ways to go. So, of course, Cindy and I very much believe in boycott, divestments, and sanctions. So people can boycott Israeli goods. We can divest from any investments we would have that make profits, and we can from the occupation, and we can encourage our government and other governments to also not use to sanction themselves from that. Of course, the U.S.'s government ties with the government of Israel is very tight, although I think it's become far more difficult as Israel becomes even farther and farther to the right. But I remind people, and I don't think anybody from Congress is on this call, but people are here that can contact a member of Congress. And one of the things I would say is just to leave a little note at the end when I talk to members of Congress or other people, that to remind them that BDS was used with South Africa, and what we're calling for with called for by Palestinians is actually modeled on that. And BDS did not destroy South Africa. BDS saved South Africa. And so I think that's one way forward. I think that we need to encourage our government to change its policy. We have changed, all of us together, changed much of the discourse in the United States, but policy has not changed. So we need to contact members of Congress and other influencers to change that policy. And then if somebody takes a baby step in the right direction, we have to have their back. We have to congratulate them, and we do whatever is necessary to have their back. So our Congressman Brian Baird took huge steps before he left Congress about bringing this forward. And God bless him, he's become a friend, but we also had to have his back the best way we could.
I would just say, I think it's really difficult, but I think we have to increase the numbers of us that are reaching out to members of Congress and people in government. We know that the discourse has changed in this country, and that people are in growing numbers supportive of Palestinians and of Palestinian rights and of equality for all of the people in the region. But it's not getting through yet well enough to members of Congress, and it's going to take time. So I would just say, even though it's discouraging work, it's just terribly important that we make those calls and write those emails and ask for the meetings with members of Congress, even when it seems a bit hopeless. And I know with some members of Congress, it's more so than with others. Dr. Yasser Abu Jamai was here in our region recently. He's the director of Gaza Community Mental Health Program. And because we want so much to bring attention to Gaza when we're remembering Rachel, we're really asking during this time for people to reach out to their members of Congress and to cite the things that Dr. Yasser said we needed to ask for and say when he went to talk to members of Congress. And that was to end the blockade of Gaza, to ensure that families in Gaza have electricity for more than 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day, to denounce and work to prevent any aggression against the people of Gaza that could result during these religious holidays that are coming up. And there was a lot of concern he was feeling because of statements that were made by Ben-Gvir, very right-wing new member of the Israeli leadership, and their national security minister, who was more or less forecasting that things would happen during this period. So being really vigilant in watching for that, asking our members of Congress to be vigilant, and conditioning aid to Israel on Israel's human rights record. So I would just urge listeners to step up their work with members of Congress for Gaza, keeping in mind Dr. Yasser's message from Gaza.
Thank you so much for these detailed and thoughtful answers. There's one more question that I would like to end with, and I'm not sure how easy it would be to answer this question, but I think it would be, and if you choose not to, I understand. But there's a question from an anonymous member of the audience who says, if you could say one thing to Rachel, what would it be?
What leaped into my mind, of course, is I love you. But by, I guess, dumb luck, okay, you have short questions and we have long answers. So I spent 1970 in Vietnam, and Cindy had to write to me. She wrote to me every day while I was gone. And I've come when Rachel was in Gaza, I began to appreciate just what a labor of love that was. And I couldn't do it with Rachel. I could only talk to her on the telephone, because when I was talking to her on the telephone, I knew that she was okay. But if I imagined her, and started writing, so I only wrote her one email, and that email and her reply was the last communication we had with Rachel. But what I told her is that I was proud of her. And pride is a little bit too much. It says too much about me. What I really want to say is that I respect you. I've come to respect you. But how lucky I was. If you think if you have kids, or if you've ever been a kid, to think about, is something just cut off? What your last words to a kid would probably be more like, clean up your room or something like that. But my luck was to say, I'm proud of you. And I still am.
It's just wonderful to know that our friends are on this call and to hear from some of you. It's been some years since we've connected with some of you. So I just want to say how much I appreciate you being here. And like Craig, I tell Rachel that we love her. She talked about commitments and the importance of making a commitment. And I would let her know that not only her family, but so many other people have been inspired by her story to increase their commitment and dedication to this issue. And I'd tell her that we'll keep working.
Cindy and Craig, thank you so much for being with us today and for joining us and for talking about Rachel and her memory and about all the hard work that, unfortunately for you as parents who mourn the loss of their daughter, had to go through in order to demand justice and accountability. And as a Palestinian from Gaza who, again, was there when this happened, I have all the respect in the world for you, and I do appreciate your dedication and courage and patience and strength in the face of this loss, and all the years of struggle to achieve accountability and justice. And although things seem bleak these days, growing up in Gaza has taught me to, always strive to be an optimist and always, see the light at the end of the tunnel. So hopefully we will witness our freedom soon. And before I conclude, I would like to invite you to make any announcements to the audience if there are certain things you would like them to pay attention to. Of course, we shared the link for the Rachel Corrie Foundation for our members of the audience to check out and visit. But please, the floor is yours. If there are campaigns or initiatives or certain things you would like to shed light on before we conclude, go ahead.
Thank you, Jihad. I would just reinforce again that we just want during this period to bring attention to Gaza and to encourage people to make those calls and send those messages to members of Congress. We welcome people to our mailing list. People can go to the Rachel Corrie Foundation website and sign up for our mailing list, and we'd love to be able to be in touch with you. We're also glad to hear from you through our email info@rachelcorriefoundation.org if you have questions or messages you'd like to share. This is a big time for us because a lot of we have projects in Gaza. A lot of those are happening right now. So people can learn about those at the website, and we of course appreciate any help with those that people are able to provide. Thanks so much, Jihad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, I would like to thank those who participated in today's event and who attended from all over the US and probably also all over the world. Thank you so much for joining and for listening and for your thoughtful questions and comments. And I apologize for not being able to address all the questions, but as Cindy and Craig said, they are available to answer questions and inquiries. And so we are here at the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center in Washington, D.C. Please visit our website. Someone is drilling in our building. So please visit our website, thejerusalemfund.org, and follow us on all the social media apps, and stay tuned for more events in person in DC and virtually. And thank you so much all for attending. Thank you, Cindy and Craig.
Thank you, Jihad.
Bye-bye.